we see some words which are familiar to us or which remind us earlier in the text of Joshua. This text is taken from Joshua 23, and that phrase, be very strong. When God spoke to Joshua and said, enter the Holy Land, he used a phrase over and over again, be strong and courageous. Be strong and be very courageous. And so here, Joshua is now addressing the people. He's telling them again, this is nearing the end of the book of Joshua. Joshua has gotten old, the people have gone and they have conquered the Holy Land almost. Early on in Joshua it says, and God makes him a promise, every place you set your foot, I will give you. And what happens is, the people then don't always set their foot where they're supposed to. Last week we saw where it read, he said, Joshua asked the people, how long are you going to wait? What is it that's holding you up? And that kind of continues with this theme today, and it reminded me of a phrase that my mother said. God bless our mothers, God bless our fathers. But when I was growing up, the phrase that was said, and I'm sure it's never been said around your house, how many times do I have to tell you? How many times do I have to tell you to take the trash out, to feed the dog, to let the dog out? The dog's standing at the door with their legs crossed. You're going, do you think you might let the dog out? God says to us, how many times do I have to tell you? Again and again he asks us. Joshua reminds in this whole book, in this whole Exodus period of Israel's history, and going into the book of Judges, time and time again, and to this very day, God asks us, how many times do I have to tell you? How many times do I have to remind you of the promise? The promise that I made to those who love me. Those who call upon my name, those who abide in my word. How many times do I have to tell you that if you don't, there's consequences? He tells them in Joshua, he says, when you go into this land, when first of all, they're supposed to wipe everybody out, and it's a bloodthirsty book, and we talk about that a little bit. How can a loving God want to destroy all these people? And I always tie that to when I have an illness, or my goodness, if you're diagnosed with cancer and you go to the doctor and you tell the doctor, and the doctor asks you, well, how much of your cancer do you want to get rid of? All of it. God knows that if they leave these foreign nations alive in the land of Israel, that they will infect his people. And so God is not being ruthless, he's not being harsh to the people that are there. He's being very zealous and very loving to his people. Just like if your child is ill, you want that illness totally wiped out, taken away from them. You don't want any of that illness to remain in them so that they might get reinfected, they might get ill again later. God feels the same for his people. And so he says, when you get in there, get rid of anything that might infect you. But they don't listen. They don't pay attention. And so at the end of Joshua, Joshua is looking at what is going on, and God says, okay, remind them of this. Instead, don't call upon the name of their gods. Don't take into your household their gods. Because if you do, you'll be led astray. If you do, you will fall. You will fall away from me and you will start serving these other gods. And so we know that in Israel, what catches them quite often is they live in this land and they move into an area, and we moved here a year ago. And there are things that we have had to learn about living in California that we never had to learn about living in the Midwest. How to deal with year-round sunshine and warmth is one of them. My sister-in-law called yesterday from Ohio, and Pam and I remember very well the blizzard of 1978. And my sister-in-law called yesterday and said, today we have surpassed the snowfall we had during the blizzard of 78. And we felt so bad for them. Should lie in church, no. But what happens here is these old things, they catch up to you. And so the Israelites gets their feet tangled in the false worship and the gods. They move into this area and they say, well, how do you grow plants here? They say, well, you've got to plant on the light of this moon because this God takes care of the growth. And the people go, well, I don't know, but it worked for them, so let's do it. And unknowingly, they take these practices into their house. Just like you sometimes correct your children, words they use. Why? It doesn't make any difference now. It will make a difference later. When you tell your children to say please and thank you, why? Because later on in life, that's going to be important that you say please and thank you to people who help you. And so, God is very worried about their future, and He warns them. And so the question is, if that's going to catch Israel and drive them away or pull them away from God, what is it that catches you? What is it that trips up your best intentions about trying to remain faithful to God or serving God? About you want what's best for your children, and so you bring them to a Lutheran school who has an excellently worldly education in our core curriculum, but also then teaches them about God, and we know that's important. We want them to learn about it. But then what trips us up if we go, well, but do I have to go to church every Sunday? I know sometimes I feel like that even. But what catches you up? It's personal for everyone. Every one of us has a different area where we get distracted. There's something that pulls our attention away from God. In Joshua 22, we don't have those words included in our text. As the Israelites are getting settled in the Holy Land, as they're now establishing their places, Joshua 22 talks about an altar of witness. It's an altar of witness that reminds them of God's faithfulness to them, reminds them that God brought them into this land, gives them a history that they may always look. We can think of things in our nation like the Washington Monument, like the Lincoln Memorial, things like this that have been built by man that we might remember the sacrifices of others or what went on before. But what serves the purpose as an altar of remembrance in your life? You know, you have many of them actually. You may not always think about them as an altar of remembrance. But we have things as common as wedding rings that serve to remind us of a promise we made, that serve to remind us of a love that never ends, that circular nature, the same as in our Luther's robes. We have different certificates that are hung upon our wall, altars of remembrance, different pictures that we put up to remember family times or fun times, to remember loved ones that may no longer be with us. We have these altars of remembrance. There may be gifts you have been given. There may be prizes you have won, trophies that have special places in your home. Those serve as altars of remembrance, also altars of witness, that yes, I was there. Yes, I achieved that award. Joshua says in this, and this is what I had, he says the first thing in this, be very strong. To remain strong in God. That's really our task in our faith life. To remain strong in God, to draw near to Him, to read through these scriptures on these 2 years. It's a great practice to get into. But even just each morning to remember God, to remember that He has seen us through an evening. And when we rise in the morning, we might go, I have no idea what God has in store for me today, but He brought me to this day so that I might serve Him and I might serve my family and I might serve my community. It's not about me, it's about serving others. And that's every morning when you wake up, that's really why God has allowed you to take another breath. If He were done with you, He'd call you home. But He says, guess what? There is a task that I have for you. It's to be an altar of witness to others of the love of God. To be an altar of witness to those around you. A witness of God's faithfulness and love to you. And so Joshua says first in this text, remain strong in God, and then to remember God's blessings in your life. You know, it's really easy to forget those blessings. And we as a nation have a terrible memory. We as people have a terrible memory. How many relationships break up because of irreconcilable differences? because we forget the love that we profess in our marriage vows. Because we forget the promises that we made. Our nation has a terrible rate of divorce because we forget. We forget the blessings that called us together. As children grow and the children become a big part of a family, and then the children leave the nest, and the parents sometimes look at each other and go, "Who are you? I haven't noticed you for about 15 years, 20 years." They need to rekindle, they need to remember. They need to remember why they were together. The love that called them together, and to allow those memories to rule in their lives, and not the struggles. To forget the rough times and remember the joyful moments. God asks the same thing, that we are to remember God's blessings in our lives. Some of the struggles you have faced, you have wondered where God is, but God is trying to get your attention. That's what he says in this text. He said, guess what? If you turn away from me, I'm going to come, and because I love you, I'm going to knock. And if you don't open first, I'm going to knock harder. And I'm going to trip you up, and there's going to be struggles in your life, all that you might return to me, that you might remember your love. And so, as we look at our lives, we need to remember, what is our history with God? What is our history? Have we made promises to God that we haven't always kept? I always call into remembrance the confirmation that many of you had. When you came to confirmation, you stood before God, and in the Lutheran Church we have a phrase that we promise, our confirmands make a promise, we will suffer all, even death, rather than fall away. And yet our confirmands don't always return. It's dangerous to make a promise before God that you don't keep. Because God loves you, and he expects if you say something, you'll do it. In much the same way as when you told your parents, yeah, I'll take out the trash, they thought you would. When you said, if we get a puppy, I will water it, I will feed it, I will walk it every day. And later on your mom goes, why did I ever get this dog? But what is your history with God? Do we ask God to be faithful to us when we aren't faithful to him? When we stand and go, God, where are you? And God goes, where have you been? That's a tough question to ask. And we can give glory and thanks to God that he is more forgiving and more ready to hear than we are necessarily to be ready to listen or hear from him. But so what is our history with God? And then our question becomes, if that's our history, what's our desired future? What changes are we going to make? What is our plan? What is our plan to serve God and to draw closer to him? You know, we make all sorts of resolutions at the beginning of the year, although it's down to 33% of the people in the country now make resolutions. 2/3 of the nation no longer makes resolutions on New Year's because guess what? They found out they don't keep them. But what resolutions do we need to make? What is our plan to draw near to God? Something as simple as just spending time with him. Something as simple as reading through the Bible in a 2-year program. Something as simple as remembering to thank him every morning when you get up and to give thanks for him for seeing you through a day. To give thanks for those children that are driving you nuts. Yeah, they're there for a purpose. To give thanks for those parents which frustrate you kids, because they really do love you and care for you, even though at times they may seem like they're your worst enemy. My personal philosophy is if at some point your child doesn't say, you're ruining my life, you haven't been a good parent. But we need to be intentional in our lives. We need to be intentional in our faith lives. To remember to serve God because he has promises for us. Promises for not only today but for eternity. All won, as we talked about in Luther's Rose, by the blood of Christ. One upon the cross. That we might have renewal, forgiveness, and love from our Father. As we go forth this day, let us celebrate that love. Let us rejoice in it. And let us serve him with gladness. May God be with you this day and each day.